Welcome to Beyond the Diagnosis, a series dedicated to patient stories and expert insights on Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. Presented by the CMT Research Foundation, I'm Lily Sander, and I'm thrilled to take you beyond the diagnosis. Today, we have Eloise Schlafly on the podcast. Eloise is a CMT1E patient, and she works as senior advisor at Moneta in St. Louis, providing comprehensive financial advice for complex and serious families. Eloise's CMT was caused by a random mutation, meaning that she is the only CMT patient in her family. In her own words, it's a humbling journey, one that keeps me up, and one whose trajectory I'd like to change. And Eloise is changing that trajectory through her work with the CMT Research Foundation and 1E patient group. Continue listening to explore the full spectrum of living with CMT, from pre-diagnosis challenges, the impact of diagnosis, navigating daily life, building resilience, and offering hope and advice to the CMT community. Hi, Eloise. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, Lily, for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so today we're just going to cover your life story and just hear about your story and journey with CMT and also just how that impacts your daily life now.
Sounds good.
So I want to start with pre-diagnosis. You mentioned that you were diagnosed at around 15 years old. What was life like before then? And are there any things looking back now that make sense knowing that you have CMT?
Yeah, I think being diagnosed at 15, I was a pretty normal kid by all accounts. So I played soccer with my friends on the team. I ran track and did that. I played field hockey for 1 year, I guess. And looking back, I was bad at those sports. And so now I kind of have an excuse of like, oh, this kind of explains it. I think on a more minute basis, I used to drag my feet a lot, or I do drag my feet a lot. And my mom would say, pick up your feet, pick up your feet. And we're like, this makes sense. Or I really complained a lot about shoes and just super uncomfortable. And so again, it's like, oh yeah, this all kind of tracks and makes sense. But I think I was a pretty normal kid before diagnosis by all accounts, which was pretty lucky.
Yeah, wow. So what led you seeking answers for your symptoms?
Yeah, so I think, I got kind of lucky in that, I was so bad at this field hockey that I started playing that an athletic director was like, something's not right here. And then a couple of family friends who were smarter than me said, like, hey, this just feels off. And so I went to a foot surgeon and he's like, oh, it's not me. This is a neurologist. And then I went to a neurologist and she said, ooh, I know what you have, but I'm not the right person to diagnose you. Um, and she requested actually a CMT genetic panel and then sent me off to WashU and said, hey, you need to have them talk to you. And so they boom diagnosed me and said you have CMT. So I really think I got lucky of people just said something wasn't right. I wouldn't have actively gone out searching unless people had come to us, at least at that stage of where I was in my progression.
Right. Wow. So how did your CMT present or manifest in those really early days?
Yeah, I mean, I was slow and a little clumsy, but again, I don't think I was so slow that we were like, we've got to get her tested today. And I don't think I was so clumsy that it was like, this is no good. It was just a constant, like, something's not right. And then I got really, really lucky that they diagnosed me so quickly.
Wow. How did you and your family react to this kind of sudden diagnosis?
Yeah, so I think for us, because the symptoms and because this thing progresses relatively slowly, overnight nothing changed, right? So I'm sure my parents were panicked and like, what does this mean? And wow, the trajectory of her life has just changed. But the doctors also can't tell us how it's going to change, right? So they can't say, like, hey, next year this is going to happen and the following year this is going to happen. So it's just kind of a sit there and like, well, we're going to hope that she remains normal for as long as possible. Um, if I had to guess, I think my mom would say like our goal was to try to keep you as normal as possible for as long as possible. So nothing changed overnight. I think as things changed, my parents were, as open as they could with me of how do I help you and how do we make things work. Um, so all I felt was love and support and what do we do? I think over time we developed this like how do we fix it mentality, right? Of oh no, this is really going to become a problem for you and is there something we can do to cure this thing? So I laugh every time I went to wash you, the doctor would say, okay, well, we're going to do these muscle tests, we're going to do this, that, and the other. And then I would say, okay, well, can we get on your computer and can we look up clinicaltrials.gov like we did last time? I don't know why I didn't feel like I could search that on my own at home, but for some reason, every time I went there, we looked. And every time we logged on, there was nothing, right? So it's also a little depressing. You're like, oh, shoot, this is supposed to be that database that tells me something good is coming. And there was nothing there. So I think over time, my family and I, we were just like, wow, we don't know what's going to happen. And personally, I had this impending sense of doom of like, this is not going to be good. Um, but my next day reaction after getting a diagnosis was probably like, okay, here we go. Don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and so you were a young teenager during that time. And so did you let your friends know, or did you kind of ride out high school normal, quote unquote?
I totally wrote out high school. So I um I got really lucky in that I went to, or I am really lucky in that I went to a K through 12 school, girls only for high school. And so the people I knew as a kindergartner were the same people I was hanging out with as a senior. And so they knew me pre-diagnosis, they knew me during the phase I was being diagnosed, and they knew me, after once things were starting to get worse. And so, if I fell in the hallway at school, which was a thing, someone knew how to pick me up off the ground, right? And you probably know that there's a right way to pick you up and a wrong way to pick you up. They all know the right way. Yes. And that was amazing, right? And if they didn't know how to, if it was some friend who was like, I'm not strong enough, I don't, whatever, they knew who to grab. And so I think just I was very lucky that way, right? But I definitely pushed down all of the feelings. I didn't talk about it. I think I told one friend, like, I have CMT, and they were like, oh, I don't know what that means. I'm sure they Googled it. But we did not talk about it. It was just like, we're going to pick her up if she falls. And if she wants to talk to me, then I will talk to her.
Wow, I so relate to that. You know, the friends that know how to handle all of the things.
Yep.
That's so awesome that you had that support. But yeah, it's a journey. Sometimes you're not ready to just, you're 15 years old, this major life-changing news, you don't always want to talk about it, especially in high school.
Yeah.
So, wow. So, okay, you're graduating from high school, you're dreaming about your future, you're picking out colleges. Something I'm in the midst of right now, and I feel that CMT has very heavily influenced how I'm planning my future. So, I'm curious, how did CMT affect the rest of your education and eventually your choice of career?
Yeah. So I think, I told you I went to this all girls Catholic school and it was small, right? So I knew everybody there. So I think for me, they all got comfortable with me. Everyone helped me in high school, right? It was truly all hands on deck. So I knew when I went to college, I was going to be absolutely lost if I was at some huge institution. And so I think pretty quickly I threw out the big schools. Um, so I looked for a small school that was going to be somewhat close to home while still leaving home because I needed to get out and to figure out life on my own, I think. But it was really scary, right? Like you've created this support system at home, and now you have to figure out how you're going to recreate it in a whole new space. And that was petrifying. I think I called my mom crying once a week, every week for the first semester of college because I was just like, so like, what is going on? Um, and over time, I redeveloped the support system that I had in high school. I joined a sorority very quickly to see if I could mimic my all girls Catholic high school. And the sorority was the best place for me. It was amazing. I loved it. And I got to know campus safety. And I had one good guy friend who was in a fraternity. And by the end of college, fraternity pledges had to get signatures from the actives. And the signatures that the pledges would get would be helping Eloise get from place A to place B. So we had fun with it and just kind of leaned in and made it work. I think in terms of really studying, in my head, I wanted to be a doctor, right? My dad was a doctor. I would be a doctor. I spent about 30 minutes in a biology class and said, well, that's not going to work. I actually went to his operating room and I passed out and was like, well, that's not going to work. So then I interned for my mother one summer, which she designs and outfits restaurants. And it's very cool. She knows all these fun chefs and it's great. She has about 1,000 steps in her warehouse, and she leaves every day with, plates and glasses that she's going to take to restaurants. And I was like, well, carrying plates is not my best option. Um, but more than that, I think I just don't have the business or the design eye that she does. And so again, I think I got lucky where I was talking to a family friend and he was like, you should come work for me. And it was the best decision I've ever made. I've been there now 12 years and I love what I do.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I love that you have that, like you said, recreating that support system. And I think that's something that we're always doing as life evolves and changes. So, looking back now, if you could put into words how CMT initially affected your life and how that has changed as you've gotten older and now you're talking about your CMT and you're being a part of the solution. So, how has that evolved in your mind?
Yeah, I think honestly it's been a 180. So I spent a long time avoiding it and pretending like it didn't happen, right? I was in full denial probably. Everyone around me figured out how to help me through, but we were never going to acknowledge that this was a bad thing, that we weren't sure how it was going to happen or how it was going to go through life. Um, and I think over time it gets really, really hard to push it down and to avoid it, right? It's exhausting. It's exhausting for me, it's exhausting for friends, it's exhausting for family. I think in college, maybe I told one person that I have CMT and they just had to let it trickle through the system for everybody else to figure out what was actually going on because I made it impossible for them to ask me. I mean, they were walking on eggshells, like they knew to give me their arm and to help me, but they were absolutely not going to ask me how I felt about it because they knew I'd be very frustrated because I do not talk about my emotions, or I didn't. Um, and I think, finding the CMTRF, Susan reached out to me at some point and learning that there are people really working for a cure. So not being an emotional person, some of the patient support stuff was never something that I was going to gravitate towards. But with the CMTRF being so heavily research focused, I was immediately interested. Um, so I think the Research Foundation really changed things for me a lot. Um, but also, I started going to therapy, which was, kind of a taboo of like, oh, wow, I didn't tell people that I went to therapy. It was very private for me. But the woman that I work with is like very helpful in me figuring out how to talk about it and to be okay with it. And to show my braces to people. I never showed my braces to people. And now I always do, right? So it's evolved a lot. And I think for me, it just took a lot of time and a lot of conversations and building my own confidence. I mean, it's funny now if I get to know people and they don't basically quickly learn that they should give me their arm or ask me how I'm doing or ask what's going on, I get frustrated and I'm like, man, they're not a very good friend. Like, well, why don't they care about what's going on? Obviously, it's clear. And I mean that, if people aren't asking me really what's going on, then I'm really not interested in figuring out what's going on with them.
Wow, yeah. No, I relate to that 100%. I've had many people tell me, Lily, don't worry. I don't think of you as disabled. And I laugh and I'm like, okay, CMT is such a big part of our lives and identities. And so I think it's so important to have people who see the full picture of you in context. Some of the stuff will not make sense if you don't see me as disabled. So that is really, really important. And I'm glad that you have shifted from not talking about it to a couple months ago we were at a conference and you were speaking to a room full of scientists about it. So that's amazing.
Yeah, it was a big change.
What does your life look like now with your career, your family, your relationships, and how does CMT play a role in that?
I think CMT plays a role in everything I do, right? So I have told people, or I think um, I'm constantly 10 steps ahead of most people because I have to be, because you have to have everything planned, right? So if people say, like, oh, let's just do this, it's like, well, okay, but to do that, you have to figure out, like, how we're going to get from here to here, and how we're going to get from there to there, and how we're going to get from there to there to ultimately get to the final destination, or whatever the case may be. Um, I obviously am stubborn and I don't use a wheelchair, and I probably should be in some scenarios. But because of that, I really can't get into every building that I want to go to. And so I'm known to call the boutique and ask for help to get in. I'm known to call my sister-in-law and say, hey, can I pick you up and can we run an errand? I'm known to ask my husband if he can help me do A, B, C, and D. Like my support system is pretty unbelievable in that whatever I need to get done, they make it happen for me. And I think that's true in, my professional life too, of they really help me build confidence of, Eloise, you can do this. And they kick me in the, what, if I'm feeling down and like, how am I going to figure this out? And the support it's very, very humbling of like, it's constant and it's unending, because this disease is constant and it's unending and it's just going to get worse.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. I wish we were all so lucky to have that kind of support, and I'm sure that that has really helped your relationship with CMT. Being able to do the things that you want to do. Wow. So let's talk about milestones. We've talked about college. You recently got married. Congratulations.
Thank
How
you.
has CMT continued to affect these milestones that, all young adults or most young adults are achieving? And, we know that people with CMT can live relatively normal lives. They can get married, have children, have fulfilling careers. But we also know that CMT plays a part. So I'm curious to know how CMT has kind of affected things for you.
Yeah, so I think with CMT, one, it's the physical, right? Of like, I could fall at any second, right? Even if I have figured out the most flat, I have my braces on and I have something that I can hold on to around me, I could fall basically at any second. But I think the second part of it, for me at least, is I have an extreme level of fear in everything that I do, right? So, yes, I could fall. But also with the milestones that you're asking me about, graduating high school, I had to ditch my whole support system and recreate it. And I was very scared of that. Graduating college, I again had to leave my support system and I had to enter adult world and figure it out. And I was very scared of that. Um, when I bought a condo. So where I am now is a condo that I bought after college. And I was very scared of looking for truly a needle in a haystack place where I could live that was going to work for me. And, I looked at 100 apartments because I didn't want to buy out of college. I mean, that was silly. But all of the apartments, none of them work. None of them are going to be quite right for us. They all have a lip to get into the shower, or the parking lot is disconnected from the building, or you have to go up steps to get to the garage, just weird intricacies that really don't work for me. So I ultimately bought, and I'm surrounded by a lot of older people, which it makes sense, why they would care about accessibility as well. So buying a place was a big fear of mine, and it's been fantastic. Dating was a really big fear of, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to talk to someone about what's going on with me in a way that I've never had to talk to them before. And, my mom always said, you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find the right one. So I had to meet a lot of guys and I went on a lot of first dates. And that was not easy of like, yes, I have this rare neurological disease and I promise I'm normal. And, it's just hard, uncomfortable, awkward, embarrassing conversations. And it was scary. And I think approaching my wedding was scary of like, how do I do all of the things that normal brides do? And I think now it's okay, how do I start a family? I'm certainly not going to be like a normal mom in that I can't do a lot of these things. So that's the latest fear on my list. But I think anytime I have started down the path of feeling pretty nervous about what's going to happen next, my best friends, my mom, someone kicks in and says, Eloise, you've done it 100 times now. This, you're going to be fine. Just go for it. And we jump in.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's amazing. I'm curious about your wedding. What were some of the accommodations and different things that you implemented so that you could have the best day with energy levels and, just really making sure that you were present and not worried about, am I going to fall right now?
Yeah, so I think I was worried because I'm a worrier and that's just my nature. But I think if I'm a bride and doing it again, I would get rid of social media, I would get rid of Pinterest, I'd get rid of all the things that we compare ourselves to because there's no CMT bridal magazine, right? There's nothing that we can really compare ourselves to and say, okay, this is comparing apples to apples. It's futile, right? My husband was pretty amazing. He had veto power in basically everything that we did, but I got to run with it and pick it all out. So I think, for me, the accommodations that I really focused on, I was worried about my dress, I was worried about my shoes, and I was worried about how I was going to dance. And so I think for the dress, I went to a couple bridal stores. um, I never want to walk into a bridal store again. I hated that experience. These dresses are, they're very large so that there's a wide range of body types that can fit in it. Which meant for me, there was just so much extra material, but they're
Mhm.
also poofy in the tulle and the sequins and all of the stuff. And it was like, I'm never going to be able to carry this. Like I can't get down the aisle in this thing. So we went short and we were like, we're going to wear a short dress and it's going to be fine. And I was lucky that I had a family friend who could help make the dress for us, which is like I'm very lucky. But so I could weigh the material on this hand and weigh the material on this hand and say, okay, this one's lighter. This is the one that we need to use. And the family friend's like, yeah, most places would try to put a liner here. I'm like, ditch the liner if we don't need it. Um, with the goal of just how do we make it as light as possible. I think for the shoes, for me, I saw constant photos on social media, and my friends have all gotten married. And there's like a beautiful photo of the bride putting on a pair of shoes, and they're usually a fabulous heel or something. And it's like, I can't recreate that. What do I do? And I finally was like, well, I have to wear Allbirds. The Allbirds are the only tennis shoes I wear. They're the only shoe I wear. So I will wear white ones. And then it was like, well, if I'm going to be comfy in white Allbirds, then maybe my bridesmaids should be too. And then maybe my mom should be too. And then maybe my brother should be too. So we basically all wore Allbirds. And then I texted my friends and I said, hey, FYI, I am truly wearing tennis shoes to my wedding, and you guys should too if you want to. And so they all wore tennis shoes. And it was hilarious to see everybody in their, cocktail dresses and then everybody in their tennis shoes. And I got a lot of texts after, and they're like, that was amazing. I never want to wear heels to a wedding again. So we really leaned in on that one, and it worked out well. And then I guess the last big one is just I had a stool that was covered in flowers that I could sit in for the dancing part, and it spun. And so my friends could come up and spin me around, and it was great. I got a little dizzy a couple of times, so I held on to my husband, was like, you need to keep this stationary because I'm gonna vomit. um, but it was fun. So I wasn't as worried about falling because I was in the shoes that I wanted to be in, and I had my dad on my arm walking me down the aisle, and I had my stool on the stage that was gonna make it all okay.
Wow, that's amazing. I love the touch of having everyone wear tennis shoes. That's truly shows the support that they have for you. Wow.
It was fun.
Oh my goodness. Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so now I want to kind of switch to how CMT has affected your perspective on life and the future of CMT and how you are helping change that. So, thinking about CMT, we know that it affects us physically and mentally. How has it changed things for you? Is your perspective different?
So I think my big life perspective that would be maybe slightly different or just because of CMT is that I very much believe in science, and I have a very hard time if we're not promoting science in anything health related. Um, Science matters a lot to you and me. And the more of it, the better. I think we've got these pretty unbelievable researchers out there that are doing these wild things, projects. And we have to encourage that as much as we can. The folks at the NIH, the folks that have been funded through the CMTRF, the folks at the universities, like, keep going. We need them and we need to encourage them to keep going, is kind of my philosophy on life. So I struggle when there is not an emphasis on science. I think in terms of my perspective on life as me, more as me, Eloise, I think CMT has definitely made me a harder person, right? Like, it's my life is physically harder than others, despite being very lucky and very blessed of like my family has made things doable for me. It's just hard. I think when I meet somebody new, I have to bring my vulnerability out immediately, right? Like, I walk up and I meet them and they immediately know that something is wrong with me. What I think that forces, and I've never asked somebody, but what I think that forces is them to bring their guard down a little bit too, because all of a sudden they feel in this like different position. Um, and I think I see people more quickly. So, I can walk down the street and I get a once over, and then I hear the mother tell the child something like, "Hey, don't stare at people." And I hear quickly, like, if it's "don't stare at people," or if it's "hey, everybody needs a little bit of help in life and she just needs an arm." You hear what people say and you see it in their eyes, and I feel like I can judge people better for that, right? Um, I'm easier to disappoint. So if you treat me poorly and I see that you treat me poorly, and if you say something that's a little off, I'm probably not going to be impressed with you, right? What I also see, and maybe more importantly, is I have a lot more, I see joy a lot more quickly. So I don't know if you've experienced this, but I was leaving a little store, and I had maybe 7 steps to get to my car. So I was parked in a pretty good spot. So I knew that I had 3 stops to get to a pillar that I could rest on. And then from the pillar, I had like 2 steps to get to my car where I'd be able to negotiate around, right? So I get to my car, and this woman walks out of the store next door, and she basically starts yelling at me. And she's like, ma'am. I'm like, yes. And she says, "I just watched that whole experience and that was incredible." And I was like, "Oh, thank you." And she said, "I'm a physical therapist and I was working with someone, so I couldn't come out and help you." She goes, "But I watched you like plot the path and then get there. And that was just really cool how you're making it happen." And I call my mom with like tears of joy. I'm like, "Mom, this woman just acknowledged what I just did and saw that it was cool and she went with it." I don't care at all if someone validates me at work, really. Like, that's not fine. I did a good job. I got an A+ on my test, right? But when people see just how hard it is for us to negotiate life and they say, "Wow, you've figured it out," that to me is like creme de la creme, fantastic. So I think I'm harder and easier to disappoint, but I also think it's easier for me to feel joy. I asked this random older gentleman for an arm one time, and I said, "Excuse me, sir, can I have an arm? I just need to get from here to here." And I said, "I promise I'm not a crazy person. I just have a little bit of hard time walking. And like, would you consider this?" And this is just out kind of in the streets randomly. And he looks at me and he's like, "Ma'am, it would be a great joy to help you." And he gave me an arm and he made sure I got there and was safe and sound. And it was just like, this feels good. And again, I called my mom and I was like, "Mom, you won't believe what happened to me." Um, so I think, I don't know, maybe that's cheesy, but I think I see joy a little bit better.
Yeah, I think we have to rely on strangers, and that is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. But also, we can see the good in humanity and also in our communities. I always explain to people that the CMT kind of cuts out the bad people. And so, like, if you're weird and you are shallow, especially with dating, it's like, you don't see me and you're scared off by CMT. Okay. But also, that does make life harder. But I think it's a hidden blessing. So I'm always trying to look for that with life with CMT. And I love that story of the woman acknowledging all of your work. People don't realize how much work that we go through. And like you, I'm an avid planner and I have my day planned down to the minute. And people are always like, Lily, why are you so type A? And it really does come down to, I need to conserve my energy. I have my plan. I can't just go with the flow. So I think that's why a lot of us are anxious. We have to plan ahead, but that's just how we have to get through life. So I love when able bodied people are just pleasant and willing to help. So I want to talk about being involved and how being an active part of the solution, finding a cure, a treatment, how does that affect you mentally and emotionally? How does that help you by staying involved?
Oh yeah, I think it's been awesome. For a long time, I believed that nothing was happening and we were getting nowhere. And now, I mean, you and I are part of a grassroots operation finding other patients across the world. And we're committed to it. And the researchers that we talked with in Nashville, that we were able to get 25 researchers or whatever the number was to come to Nashville, to lose their weekend, to sit in a dark room. I'm sure it was nice outside, and talk how they're going to cure 1E is wild and literally something I never thought possible. Like I truly did not believe that would ever be something that happened. Um, Lily, you and I are rare and we're rare among the rare. Um, so having the two of us is pretty wild, and knowing that you're a 1E patient as well, finding other 1E patients as well. It's crazy and it's fun. And the people that I've found through social media and whatever, I'm thrilled with what we're doing. It's given me purpose, it's given me mission, it's quantifiable, right? We have our spreadsheet of people with 1E, and the longer that gets, the better. And it's been nothing short of amazing.
I think looking back to a year ago, we were in Boston after the CMT Research Foundation's conference, and we sat down and we made a plan. And looking back now, just looking at, we had the conference and we're making progress. And it is slow because CMT research is slow. But just in 1 year, what we've been able to accomplish is pretty insane. And even just walking away from the conference last year after speaking to researchers and hearing what they're doing in the lab, I was filled with such hope. I had never heard of any of this stuff going on. I get all the newsletters, but I don't really know science, so it's a foreign language to me. But to hear it kind of dumbed down, and this is what we're doing, this is what we need, we're searching for you and we're looking. And also the researchers that I talked to, they were so appreciative of me, and I'm sure you experienced this too. They were like, we love patients, we love meeting patients. And I just felt the same way about them. I can't believe that people are in labs actively searching for a cure for us. It's
Yeah,
insane.
I think that's right. Going to the conference, you sit in this room and you hear from researchers and you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought anyone was going to study what we have. And all of them have, and they know so much more than we know, which feels like very much a shift, right? Because usually most of our people know much less than you and I know, right? And so you sit in this room and you're humbled because they're really researching something that matters so much to us. And I agree. I've been to a couple of labs, and you get in there and you look at the mice and you look in their microscopes and you're like, that's me. That's me. You're helping me here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I think a lot of scientists haven't met patients, and so it's pretty it's pretty cool to get to meet them.
Yeah, I think it's also so important to for them to be able to see the phenotype of how this presents. And I think there's a lot of gross misconceptions that different researchers have, and that's no fault of their own. It's just, you know, involving patients, I think, is a relatively new concept. And so if we can directly tell them, yes, we want a drug to stop the progression, that would be great, which they previously didn't know that we would want. I think that that is incredible. And I saw some CMT mice at Vanderbilt. That was the top of my list. I was always asking, where are the mice? And I saw them and I was just like, this is insane. They have the same thing going on that I do. I'm just thinking to 10 years ago when, I wasn't very involved. I was young too, but I could have never dreamt of this amount of research happening. And obviously, we need more and we need more money. But it's just, I think it's really exploded. And so I'm really, really hopeful for the future. And having that hope, we need it on our bad days and on our good days too. So I want to hear, in your perfect world, like, what are your hopes for CMT treatments and research? If there was a drug tomorrow, like, how would that make you feel? Just hearing that, we're close and we've been close for a lot of years. But we truly are closer than we ever have been. So how does that affect you?
Oh, it's amazing. Uh, if there were a drug tomorrow, I would be like crying and celebrating and all of the things. And I know that we're going to have that feeling sometime soon. I just don't know when it is, hopefully sooner than later. But I mean, the researchers that I've met are just so unbelievable, so smart, so awesome. And I'm like, I know they're going to do it. So we just need to get them to, keep going. But I'm pumped. I'm excited. I'm thrilled for them. I'm thrilled for us, and I can't wait.
I always think, when I'm hearing about all of this science from them, I'm like, thank God you know what you're talking about. I'm sitting there nodding and catching a few words from, the high school biology class I've taken, and I'm just like, wow, you have dedicated your life to this. Especially, I'm always talking about Dr. Shy, always, especially like clinicians like him, and he has his natural history study for 1E patients, which is insane. I never ever thought that we would have our own study. So I think it's exploding, and especially for 1E, we're gonna get it done. So I think it's important to envision the future in that way, being cured. Yeah,
I think
it's hard to
I
think.
it's wild to think that or to know that we're on the precipice of something good happening. But yeah, I mean, every person I meet, I'm like, call Dr. Shy, talk to Kaylee. We need to get you in the natural history study. It's worth the plane, it's worth the train, it's worth the drive, whatever you have to do, because we need your data. And it's going to get us closer to a cure. I think, your comment on you don't understand the science, or and maybe that's too simplified, but I've definitely reached out to Dr. Carter at Vanderbilt and said, hey, is this what you mean when you say this? Because I do not understand. And he's distilled it to like 2 + 2 = 4. And I'm like, that I get. Um, but yeah, it's amazing how much they know and how little I know, but I'm thrilled that they know a lot more than I do.
Right. And that goes back to like the knowledge sharing. We understand our daily lives with CMT and how a drug could impact us, and they understand the science. So I think it's so important to come together. And that's one thing I love about the CMTRF's conferences is we can bring them both together. And just meeting these researchers, it is life changing. And so even interviewing them, I'm just like, oh my God, I'm starstruck. You have a lab for CMT, you're a CMT clinician. This is crazy. And I have had them dumb it down for me and be like, okay, also just like what CMT is. There are so many mutations and different genes. And so I was like, give me just this simple explanation. And so that's one of my goals too with this podcast is to bring the science bring a new accessibility for it so that patients can understand it in a way you don't need a chemistry degree to understand. And I
Yeah,
think that's really important too. All right,
agreed.
I'm curious about any CMT life hacks that you have to share with us. I know that I have had to find so many different gadgets. Amazon is my best friend for button hooks and zipper pulls, and I found a great shower chair that I was so excited about. And I'm like, who would have thought that I would be excited about a shower chair? So I'm curious to know if you have any life hacks that you would like to share with us.
I wish I'm constantly looking for them. I think all birds, I know I really push them, but try them because they're good in braces for your braces.
Let's get a
Um,
sponsorship.
I know, I know. Um, and then I will at some point soon, I'll probably start switching buttons to magnets so that things are easier to open and close. Um, but that's kind of all I got. My real life hack is go to sleep early because everything's better after a good night's sleep.
Yeah, no, 100%. I would also say build in naps. I'm a big proponent of naps. That's my number one thing. I need time for a nap every day.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important to find ways to make our lives easier. There's the social model of disability that we're not disabled by our disabilities, but by the circumstances in which we live. I don't agree with that fully because if everything was accessible, we would still be in pain and we would still be stumbling around. But I think that it's so important to have devices like braces. I always talk about how life-changing braces are. Um, and I like that you touched on showing off your braces. I'll be honest, that's something I still really struggle with. Being in high school, people are very cruel. And so, it's one of those things where you have to learn to accept this part of yourself that helps you so much. And so, if I could give advice to any of our listeners, I would say make your life as easy as possible. It's not it's not anything to be ashamed of to have a shower chair or to have different devices. Make it easy so that you can conserve your energy for bigger things like advocacy. My last question for you is what advice would you give to someone newly diagnosed with CMT or to a younger listener who is dreaming about their future and feeling unsure about what CMT could hold for them and how that could affect their career or their wedding and things that you've navigated?
Yeah, I think what I tell everyone is go to Dr. Shy or a Dr. Shy clinic. Don't waste your time with doctors who aren't the actual experts of there are a lot of doctors who understand or know CMT, but there are very few who know CMT super, super well. So the Inherited Neuropathy Consortium is amazing. So go there. And then I would say this is maybe a do as I say, not as I do, but take it one day at a time of you got to just get through one day so that you can get to the next without being so fearful of the future or you're never going to do stuff. And I spent a lot of time today telling you that I get really scared about a lot of the things that I do. But I think at the end of the day, my mom and my husband, they just push me to keep going. And that's what's made it all happen, right? So just figure it out because you're going to have to. Um, for you asked something else. Do I have any advice? Um, I think I stuffed this stuff down for so long, which was an unnecessary use of energy. And the more you talk about it and the sooner you talk about it, the sooner you're going to find a mission like I found or a passion like you found in advocacy. So don't wait. And people have to come to that on their own terms, right? You can't force that on people. Um, but I think the sooner that people come to it, the better.
Yeah, I would say getting involved too really helps. Meeting patients, it's really hard if you've never met anyone with CMT and you feel super isolated. And I know geographically it can be really challenging to maybe you won't find someone in your city, but go if you can go to the I'm always plugging the conference. Go to the conference
I agree.
each fall. or just get involved on social media. We live in such a golden age of connection. And I like what you said about the fear. Yeah, we're constantly afraid of the future, afraid of today, afraid of tomorrow. Um, and I think that even looking up to people who have CMT who are older, they'll say the same thing. And so doing it anyway, we will figure it out. And that's something I have to constantly remind myself of. But
Yeah.
I think that it's so important to have people with CMT that you can look up to and or just talk to and say, how did you do your wedding? How did you do X, Y, and Z? And so I think that's so important. So I would say to get involved. Thank you so much, Eloise, for coming on the
You're
podcast
welcome.
today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your story, and I'm sure that this will touch many patients.
You're so welcome.
Beyond the Diagnosis is brought to you by the CMT Research Foundation, dedicated to research, committed to a cure. For more information on Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, please visit us online at cmtrf.org.